Hi everybody. So for the attendance submission, I read pages 298 to 306, 42 and 43, and pages 16 to 27. And basically it was discussing in the first section how different sounds, rhythms, and patterns can influence the way that a poem is read and structured, and how that format is able to hold the integrity of the poem without necessarily depending on rhyme. So rhyme comes in many different ways, and it's focusing specifically on the consonants and vowels and the pattern in which those are written. You also have different forms of, for example, alliteration and ways that the consonants and vowels are written in patterns, so that the way that it's spoken does end up being written into a verse. So it can be in the form of a free verse or a formal verse, and also it can take on the forms of classical rhyming. In the second section, we were reading about sound, so the different elements that go into sounds and the different forms of cadence that make up a poem. So for example, it can take on the rhythmic cadences of like a song, in which case you have the supporting syllables that come from the English language or any other language, that makes it so that the poem is structured in such a way that it has a cadence to it, and that cadence, it gives it its poetic structure. And then in the next chapter, we were reading about image and imagination, and how using different words, adjectives, verbs, passively and actively, can help not only create the story or create the poem or story in such a way that is experienced by the reader, but it also upholds what the author is trying to communicate or transmit. So for example, one example that I really liked is the idea that you can use imaginative writing to pass on a moral. So for example, the example used in the book was, not everything that appears to be valuable is actually valuable, but instead of allowing that message to be dismissed, you can put it in the form of imagination in such a way. For example, all that glistens is not gold. So instead of conveying a meaning or a moral, you are conveying an image, and that image itself contains the moral. And in that way, you can create a story using the senses, using the five senses, and then transmit an idea as well, communicate a message. In the last section we read, it was going into the details of the concrete and significant details of, for example, if you are being exact, or for example, you're using an imaginative writing, are you using concrete examples, or are you using significant details that give an allusion to the idea, or are you actually explaining something? Another aspect of this chapter that I really liked going into was the figures of speech. I think that the figures of speech are really important when it comes to structuring a poem or a short story, because you can use similes and metaphors, for example, to describe something and create an image without necessarily using an exact example. Also, of course, you also have hyperboles, oxymorons, and puns, which are great wordplay for when an author wants to transmit an idea without necessarily being exact. So this goes into the realms of abstract and concrete, which of course I think that many readers are very responsive to abstract forms of thought, because it allows for their imagination to take control, rather than having to like logically describe or explain something, which of course can take away from the story itself, especially in creative writing. And then last but not least, we read the poem Facing It, and this poem is very touching, and in a way uses a lot of imaging and different forms of breaks to create a dramatic sense as well as convey an emotional experience. I found that it was a very powerful way for, at what the time can be considered a controversial message, to be received in a way that is sympathized with and at the same time related to it, so it becomes relatable. I think that the use of, for example, metaphors or illusions allows for this poem to be not only very touching but also very striking. One example that I really liked was at the very end, and this, to me, it carries a very heavy political message. The author writes, the author Yusuf Komunyaka writes, in the Black Mirror, a woman's trying to erase names. No, she's brushing a boy's hair. And in this way, I believe that he is referring to, using this image, he's referring to how at this time in society, people might be trying to look away or not relate to or sympathize with the situation with among the African American community, but using this, which of course I'm struck by how bold the author was in referring to the young boy and the woman as Caucasian, but in this way, we're able to feel the frustration of a community that might be being disregarded in general in terms of representation. So this author does a really good job. And again, I want to point out, I really like the forms of alliteration where he keeps referring to the vowel I turn that way, I'm inside, because I go down, I touch. So it's a very personal poem, but it also has a very strong cadence. It really does bring you into the author's perspective. And so in this way, authors are able to convey societal criticisms and messages while at the same time being able to construct a story that a person can be absorbed in, and relate to, whether as a veteran or as a reader. With that, thank you so much. This is a great section. Until next time.